Steve, hi, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So, about the website saving funeral costs, what are the key areas where families typically overspend on funerals?
One of the main areas that people can overspend on is the funeral director's costs and the administration in arranging the funeral. That's why on my website I promote low-cost undertakers to keep the funeral director's fees down. Additionally, they can overspend on costs, disbursement costs, such as the funeral wake and flowers and other, if they don't organise the spokesperson for the funeral themselves directly, such as the celebrant or the humanist, again they can overpay. It's always best to book the celebrant or whoever you're having as a spokesperson directly yourself, not go through a third party such as an undertaker. Likewise with floristry as well, flowers, book it yourself and shop round for a low-cost undertaker, which I've got listed on the site.
So, in terms of saving on funeral expenses, what are the most effective ways families can save money on funeral costs without compromising on the service?
Well, as I briefly said a minute ago, number one is by using a low-cost undertaker, so you're not paying overpriced fees. Secondly, you can shop round. A lot of people don't realise this. You can shop round for your own coffin for the funeral. When I say your own coffin, I mean obviously for the bereaved. What a lot of people don't understand is that you can also decorate these coffins.
All right.
So, to put it into practice, if you was to order
drawn them.
Yeah, you can order a cardboard coffin, and you can get the children, or if you've got children or grandchildren, to decorate the coffin, or you can get friends, or anybody that was associated with the deceased to embellish the coffin, which is very nice. It's very personalised. A lot of people don't realise they can do that, but there's lots of other coffins that you can buy quite cheaply from suppliers, which I've listed on the site. The venue and the catering, I go into quite a length on the site about that, because again, if you book it directly yourself, if you book the hall yourself, or even if you have it in a public house, an area in the public house, it's a good thing to do because it can save you a lot of money. I mean, there'll be some people listening to this thinking, oh, I don't want to have a funeral wake in a pub. But I'll be honest, not just me, but other people I've spoken to, some of the best wakes we've been to are in pubs, because the pub will section an area off for your wake, and because it's more of an informal atmosphere. I know it's a funeral, it's a sombre occasion, but what I mean is it tends to lighten the wake a bit by having it in a public house. It lightens the atmosphere.
Yeah.
So I think from personal experience and friends that I've known, it's been very successful. But of course, you can look into hiring a community hall yourself. It saves a lot of money, and organising the catering yourself. Again, most pubs will do catering as well if you wanted that done to keep your costs down. But the main key thing here is to organise these things yourself rather than letting a funeral director do it all for you, because they will charge you for doing all this, which a lot of people don't fully realise at the time. Yes. When they're bereaved, a lot of people are stressed and they just want the easiest option. That's not because they're lazy, it's because they're stressed, and they often just take the easy way out of getting the funeral director to organise most things, like the spokesperson the funeral wake, and I mean, in the early days, I'm not going to lie, I'd done this myself years ago when I was naive to this, and as I got older, and then when my half brother died and the cost shot up, I thought, well, hang on a minute here, and then I found out about low-cost undertakers and I went into it. I thought, oh, you could have saved a lot of money by organising the wake yourself, booking it as I've just talked about in the pub or somewhere, and organising the flowers yourself, and organising the celebrant yourself, or the Salvation Army officer. Yeah, it's big money savings. So I would urge everyone to look around, and also to question if embalming is needed or not, and whether you want printed order of service sheets at the funeral, because they often are quite expensive. You can print those yourself. I know not everyone's up to doing that, But you can print and order a service sheet. I mean, I've got advice for hymns on Save Funeral Costs on the blog. You can go there and print off a hymn, or you can go online and get a hymn, and you can put it in an order. You just need to have like one A4 sheet of paper, and you can have a picture of the deceased on there. You don't need to spend a lot of money on order of service sheets. That's another way to save money. And of course, again, do you really want things like the funeral service videoed? I mean, fair enough if you do, but if you don't, obviously, I'm stating the obvious here, it's going to save you money if you don't have a videographer there. Don't get talked into having a videographer. Don't get talked into having an expensive coffin, Don't get talked into having the world's most expensive flower display, unless you really want that, of course.
I guess that's some of the common misconceptions people have about funeral pricing and services.
Yes, you're quite right there. I'm glad you brought that up, because that did go out of my head for a minute. That's a very, very important point, because the misconception is that unless you spend a lot of money, you can't give your loved one a decent send-off, which is completely untrue. You don't have to spend a fortune to have a decent quality funeral. That is a big misconception, and some of the larger undertakers will try and upsell you like more expensive coffins and what have you. I mean, this was highlighted in the CMA report that came out a few years ago.
And when you are like in that situation where you're not thinking clearly, that's very easy for them to upsell, and
Yes. Yeah, it is when you're upset. Yeah. And some people almost feel like guilty for questioning, for shopping around, which they shouldn't feel guilty, because I'm sure that a lot of deceased, their loved one, wouldn't want them to spend an absolutely extortionate amount on a funeral when it's not needed. It all comes down to money. Obviously, if you're very wealthy, you're not going to worry too much about the costs to a certain extent. I'm generalising there. I'm not saying that applies to all wealthy people, but for the average person in the UK, they haven't got thousands in their back pocket floating around just to spend out on a funeral all of a sudden.
Steve, can you talk about the differences between direct cremations, traditional funerals, and more affordable options?
Yes, direct cremations are gaining popularity, especially over the recent years, because one of the reasons I think they've gained popularity is because they're the cheapest. All the direct, when I say all, I don't mean to say it like that. David Bowie had a direct cremation, and obviously he wasn't short of money. When I say all, what I mean is all it involves is the deceased being collected, cremated, and then the ashes returned back to the family.
Right.
It's very simple and straightforward. So therefore, it saves the family organising a funeral service. They haven't got to attend the funeral service. They haven't got to think about having a celebrant. They haven't got to think about having a wake at that time. It simplifies things enormously and slashes the costs. On the negative side, some people would view that as quite a cold funeral service, where the person, as I said, is just being cremated. You're not going to a service, you're not having a wake afterwards, there's no flower. Well, you can send flowers there, but it's, they're not going to be seen by anyone. Some people view it as quite cold, whereas others will view it as it saves the family a lot of hassle, especially if they pre-plan it in a funeral plan, because you can book these in a funeral plan, direct cremations, as well as just having them. The family can arrange them anyway. I think personally they are good, and moving on to traditional funerals, that's where you don't obviously have a direct cremation, whether it's a burial or a cremation. You have a traditional funeral where you have mourners attending, you have flowers, those obviously involve more money. It depends what the deceased wanted, and also what if you're funding the funeral as a relative, what your finances are within the family. This is a very important point to consider. Funds, and you've got to fund it all. You might not literally be able to afford a full traditional funeral, much as you'd want one, and you're not prepared to get into debt over it. Yes, I know you can borrow money, but I'm not saying I would advise that, because I don't advise people borrowing money for funeral expenses unless absolutely necessary. So getting into debt I don't think is a good thing. So as I said, traditional funerals might be out of the reach for some people.
Yeah. There is some government and charitable support.
Yes, there is. And sorry as well, what was the third one after? You did ask me after traditional funerals, you said. There was direct cremation, traditional funerals, and you said another one.
Yeah. Well, I was wondering if there are more affordable options.
Oh, yes, sorry. The more affordable options are, which is not going to appeal to a lot of people, but it's a nice thing to do, I think, home burial.
All right.
You don't have to dig the grave yourself. I've got on the site a grave digging company that will come around and do that for you. But I mean, not everyone wants to have their relative buried in the back garden. However, if you've got a plot of land, a farm, a field, or for the wealthy people who've got their own estates, it's quite common for people to have the deceased family members buried in the estate. But for the average person, I realise that they're not going to, want that, but some will. But that's the most affordable option because obviously you haven't got to use an undertaker. And one very important point to bring up as well is that in the UK, undertakers are not regulated and there is no law to say that you have to use an undertaker. Most people think you've got to use an undertaker by law. They've got some sort of special certification to handle a body. No, they're not regulated.
I had the same impression actually.
Yeah, most people do. So you can quite happily have, and I've got a big article about this on my website, how to arrange a home funeral. You could have the body stored at an undertaker's, which you'd have to pay for, obviously, while you're organising the funeral, if you don't want the deceased in the house, and if you want the undertakers to dress the body and things like that, and then you pay them for that, but then have the body brought back for the funeral. As I repeat, there's no legal requirement to use an undertaker in the UK. So the most affordable is a home burial, if you're up to that.
And you have the space.
And also, briefly as well, without going all into it, because there's quite a lot in it, you have to get, I've got this on the website under home burials, but you have to get permission. I think it's from the local council. I have got it written down there now. I'm just trying to think off the top of my head. You can't just bury someone in your back garden. You have to get permission to do so, and it has to go on the title deeds of your house as well. So it's an important point to consider, like if you're going to sell the house at a later date, then a future purchaser might be put off by having a dead body in the garden, a buried, body.
Yeah.
It might put them off. You can't just bury, to make this clear, you can't just bury someone in your back garden after you've got the death certificate. You have to get, as I said, permission, and then it mostly has to go on the title deeds.
Some steps,
yes,
steps before.
Yeah, but however, as I say, that is the cheapest way of.
Yeah.
And also, if you don't want someone buried at home, you can have a natural burial. That is another cheaper way of doing it, because you approach a landowner. There's a lot of natural burial sites in the UK. Again, they're listed on the website, and you can go there and visit these sites, physically go there and look at them if you think they're suitable, and you can have the person buried there. One thing to bear in mind though with these natural burials is they're not allowed to have embalmed bodies because of the chemicals. They're not allowed to have chipboard coffins often. You've got to have something that's totally biodegradable, and also, to my knowledge, you're not allowed to erect, or I know you're not allowed to erect headstones, but I don't even think you're allowed to put wooden crosses up. So you've got no marking of the grave. If relatives want to visit the grave at a later date, basically they can't. Well, it's not physically impossible, but you'd have to write a very accurate map. Very accurate, yes. I mean, very accurate. Otherwise, if it's in a field, they wouldn't know where the body was buried.
Right, yeah. That's very interesting, actually. Natural burial. What about government and charitable support? Are there any financial assistance available from the UK government?
Oh, yes. On the site, I have a section of the site guide called Help with Funeral Costs, which lists in one area, to make it easy for the user, all the government benefits, funeral benefits. But most of those benefits only apply if you're on a low income or you're on benefits. However, on the same page it lists charitable help, which some of them are not means tested, and it also briefly talks about benevolent funds, which again often are not means tested. And I've got a whole page under site guide which talks about benevolent funds, which most people are totally unaware of. And so, I mean, benevolent funds range from people who've worked in the shoe industry, the drinks industry, like the paper industry. You've got policemen, you've got the armed forces, farming industry, printing industry. There's literally a multitude. And when I say the drinks industry, just giving you an example, that means working behind a bar. You could be involved in advertising in the drinks industry, at the brewing factory. Benevolent funds are there to help workers in many different industries. So when that person dies, the family can get in touch with the benevolent fund and either get financial help or bereavement advice and counselling, or in some cases both. It depends on what the fund is offering. You know, different funds offer different things. Bigger funds tend to offer more. So charity help, benevolent funds and the government help are all there. But as I say, a lot of the government help is if you're in receipt of benefits or on a low income.
Benevolent funds, that's something I had no idea, and the first time I heard about it was from you. Okay, so what if someone would like to apply for a funeral payment from the social fund or other government support? Can you explain how someone can do that?
Yeah, that's quite simplistic. I mean, if you go to an undertaker, a decent undertaker will walk you through what you're entitled to from the government. So you wouldn't have to visit my site or contact the government. But if you just wanted to contact the government anyway to see if you're entitled to anything else, then you could go on my site or contact the government directly, and it will. I mean, I've got direct links on the site anyway. There's telephone links and web links.
Well, the contact details.
All the contact details. Yeah, the site lists contact details for everyone, for everything. So it's all simplistic, and the government would tell you what you're entitled to. But likewise, as I said, you need to be aware that you can often get charity help, which obviously the government don't know because they're not individual charities, and you can often get benevolent fund help, which again the government won't know because they're not running benevolent funds. So it's always useful, for the sake of sitting down in front of the phone for, I don't know, an hour or two maybe, or however long it takes, because you could save yourself a lot of money from charities or benevolent funds as well as the government, if you're entitled to government help, that is.
Any lesser known charities or benevolent funds that people can approach?
There's not an enormous amount of charities that directly help. I mean, I've got some listed on the help with funeral costs page, which is listed under the site guide, and the benevolent funds, good grief, I mean there's many benevolent funds. There's a huge amount. I've listed quite a few of the popular ones on the benevolent funds page, but I've also put links to portals that list all the benevolent funds, because it's absolutely unbelievable, which is great, don't get me wrong, it's great how many of them are. There's huge amounts of them. So yeah, I would definitely advise people to shop round and look at charities and benevolent funds, as well as getting government advice.
Would you think pre-planning would help?
Yes, I do. If it's a decent funeral plan, and when I say decent, it's a lower cost one, that you need to be careful as well with a funeral plan, that to make sure it covers you if you move, which obviously a lot of people move before they die. Because if you move into another area, you need to make sure the plan will cover you and that there's no unpleasant additional costs that come up when the family come to call on the plan when you die. So you need to establish that. But the advantage of a funeral plan is that you can lock in the costs now. So say for instance you die in 15 years time, you're paying today's prices rather than the costs what they're going to be in 15 years time. There's another way of looking at it. Someone could turn around and say, well, yeah, that sounds good, but instead of giving the funeral plan company the money, I could put the money in a high interest building society. Well, at the moment interest rates aren't too bad, but you could put it into stocks and shares, or you could put it into the building society, and you could argue that you could invest that money, and then
put the money aside in some kind of investment.
Yeah. And then when you die, your relatives can just go and get the
money out.
Get the money out of there. I mean, the big question is how much funeral costs are going to go up in the next, 10, 15, 20 years after you've taken the policy out. They could go up astronomical, way beyond what your interest is.
I don't think anyone could tell that.
No, you can't tell it, no. I mean, the other good thing about them, of course, is they give enormous peace of mind to the family and to the person taking the policy out, because basically when you take a funeral plan out, you take all the stress out of the family, because you say, look, when I die, just ring this telephone number and it's all sorted.
Yeah.
So a lot of people take them out
Simple,
for that reason.
easy,
yeah, even if they're paying a bit more, because they don't want to put the stress on the family.
On your family.
Yeah, and organising a funeral is stressful, and it's an emotional time, and it's not a pleasant thing to do. I know it's stating the obvious there.
Yeah.
They have to be covered by the, I think it's the FCA, I've got it written on my site, Financial Conduct Authority. I think it's them that have to, the funeral plans companies have to abide by their rules and regulations. That basically means that if you put your money into a funeral plan, if the company were to go bust, your money's still safe.
So let's go back to the funeral directors and the role they play. You know, we touched this a bit earlier, but what do you think about funeral directors? Are transparent enough when it comes to pricing?
Years ago, a few years ago, they were not transparent enough, and when the Competitions and Markets Authority looked into them after Frank Field asked them to look into it, because he was at the time head of the Work and Pensions Committee, the report wasn't very good. I don't mean the report, rephrase that. The report was very good, but it didn't paint a lot of undertakers in a very good light, especially the key players. It was mainly directed at the key players, not the smaller independent ones. And as a result of the report, the CMA asked them to, Competition and Markets Authority asked them, or made it mandatory to display price lists now. So people
you have a
from day one, you can see.
You can see what.
Yeah, they should always display a price list. Yeah.
So let's say I get in contact with a funeral director. How should I approach the conversation and ensure that I'm getting value for money? Are there any specific questions that I should ask?
Specific questions. I would make sure in the pricing structure that everything is covered. I mean, it should be, because they're giving you a price list. If you're very emotionally stressed and you don't want to put any time into it, not because you can't be bothered, because you're too upset to do all that, and it's just not your remit, you're not cut out for that, you need to ask the funeral director if they're going to organise a celebrant or a spokesperson, how much they're going to charge you for that. And the flowers as well, if they're going to organise the flowers, how much they would charge you for that. And if they're going to organise a wake, how much they're going to charge you, so you know it doesn't just come through as a bill at the end. So if you're going to get them to do more or less everything, I would ask, and then with that information you can shop round different undertakers and see. On the site I only list low cost undertakers, because that's what Safe Funeral Costs is about. It's about saving people money, so I put low cost undertakers on there, you know. But having said that, I will say to people, you know, shop round in those as well.
Just a side note, I mean, I saw the website. It's impressive, the amount of information that is listed on there, and that's very well built, straightforward, lots of information website.
Good, I'm glad you found it easy to get around.
The UK funeral industry, trends and alternatives. What should people be aware of, like eco-friendly funerals or alternative memorial services?
Yes, eco-friendly funerals. That's what I was talking about earlier about home burials or natural burials. They're very eco-friendly. You know, you're not paying out for a coffin. Well, you can have a wooden coffin that biodegrades, admittedly.
But not a
chipboard one, I mean a natural wooden one, or a wicker basket, you know. That's another thing, by the way, another misconception in England. You do not have to bury someone in a coffin. You can bury them in a shroud.
I had no idea. I
mean, on natural burial sites they prefer that anyway.
Yeah.
But the body doesn't have to go in the ground.
Within the coffin.
No, within the coffin in the ground. No. Chipboard coffins, for instance, which are very popular. They look like real wood, you know, they're veneered chipboard. They leach a lot of chemicals out into the ground over the years, and then you've got like the plastic handles on them as well, which don't biodegrade.
Yeah. Well, I can see that
Now, where is it? In America or Canada? I've written an article about it. I've forgotten now though, because it's a long while since I wrote it. There's water cremation, where basically your body gets turned into like a soup and discharged. Now, to a lot of people, they might not like the sound of that, but it is actually very environmentally friendly. In America, there's a very enterprising woman who started up body composting, and a few of the states, how many states is it in the United States? Is it 52 or 55? I can't remember.
Well, in the US, 52, I think.
Oh, it's 52. I think there's only 2 or 3. She's trying to push it through in California, but they rejected it at the time, where she has body composting, and basically the body goes into a chamber and the relatives lay the body out with all soil around it, and they put leaves and things over it. It goes into a sealed chamber where it has a controlled temperature pass through it and ventilation for a period of 1 month, and the body naturally decomposts into this soil. The company that organised it then grind the bones and give you the soil back, and some people, I think it works better in the States in more rural areas because there's a lot of land there, and perhaps they've got more of an open idea about it than what we have. But it might almost sound comical to some people here in the UK, but then the relatives will then come in a flatbed truck, and the soil, I think it weighs about 3/4 of a tonne, all of it altogether, is then put on your flatbed truck, and you just go and distribute it out over your land or bury someone in the garden. And it's very, very environmentally friendly, because you're not paying to transport the body everywhere. Yes, no coffins, no embalming, and you're just putting anything back to nature.
Yeah.
As I said, I think it's only legal in 2 states at the moment, and I think the water cremation is only legal in a few states. I might be wrong there. It's not legal in England yet, but I think the water cremation is quite a good thing to do. Obviously, some religions, like cremation, won't allow that, but if religious culture doesn't stop it, then I think it's quite a good. At the end of the day, it's someone's personal taste, isn't it? If they want to if they want to have their funeral by water cremation, composting, cremation, or burial,
Yeah.
So it's good to give these people options. As an interesting point, years ago when cremation first came out, I've forgotten when it was now, I should know, but it was met with a lot of hostility. And now, of course, in England, it's the main source of funerals. Things have changed over the years. It was, oh good grief, yeah, especially years ago, it was considered almost like a sin to cremate a body, when it first came out. But then things changed until we got this situation now where it's more popular than burials in the UK. Although I think a lot of that is due to the cost.
I remember people arguing about that.
So maybe in years to come, water cremation and composting will go down that road. Being more popular.
How do you see that in the future? Do you think that will change in terms of affordability?
What do you mean? Sorry.
I mean, these options, funeral services.
Oh, I see. Yeah, that's a very good question. I mean, at the moment, you asked me about trends, and the trends is cremations and natural burials. It's going, they're more popular, gained a lot of popularity. Yes, I think as costs rise, I think the water cremation and maybe the composting as well will become more of a viable option.
If they come here in the UK.
Yeah, especially like burial costs, because some burial costs are horrific in cemeteries. I mean, you obviously don't have to be buried in the cemetery, but but some of them are horrific. I say horrific by the average person's standards. Obviously not if you're a multi-millionaire, but some of them are very expensive. That's why some people, when it comes to burial, they end up choosing a plot that's maybe outside where they used to live because it's a lot cheaper.
That was a great conversation, Steve. Thank you for taking the time to come here and talk with me. As a final advice, what would be the most important piece of advice you'd give someone who's about to arrange a funeral but has a limited budget?
Very simple. I mean, ideally visit my site and go on step 1, low cost undertakers. If you don't want a lot of hassle, and go to a low cost undertaker, visit the site guide and go on help with funeral costs, look at all your government benefits and charity help, and then look at benevolent funds if the deceased was entitled to, had worked in one of those industries. And as I said, shop around the low cost undertakers. And if you've got it in you and you want to wake, organise it yourself. As I said before, Don't get the undertaker to do it, organise it yourself. As I said, you can have the coffin delivered. Some funeral packages, by the way, some companies will offer funeral packages, which can be both good and bad. I say bad, what I mean is you can have things in the package that you don't want, but you can't take them out. Like, say for instance, they was offering a coffin, which they wouldn't normally offer a coffin in the package. You think, oh, I don't want that coffin, I'd rather have a cardboard coffin I can paint. They say, well, sorry, it comes with the package cost. But at other times, if you just want it simple and you're not worried about decorating the coffin, you can just have the package cost, which is often a bit cheaper. Just look into it. That's what I'm saying to people. Look into it and try and use the low-cost undertakers, because that is where your main money saving will be.
Yeah.
Which are mostly independent, the lower cost ones.
Well, this was an eye-opening conversation. You mentioned a lot of options and you gave a lot of advice to save funeral costs. That's great. Well, thank you very much again, Steve. I think for the listeners, savefuneralcosts.co.uk, the website,
yes.
Everything is listed there.
Yes.
Definitely go there, have a read, lots of information, guided steps. The website is straightforward, easy to navigate. And there's also a blog there, is it?
Yeah, I say the blog covers a lot of subjects there, you know, the additional subjects. I've set it up now so that it is, over the 4.5 years now, it's a specialist consumer help site. I'm trying to organise it as a one-stop consumer help site. You haven't got to go elsewhere to save money. I haven't mentioned this, but also there's under site guide, there's low-cost will writing in the UK and low-cost probate. That's another hot potato. You've got to be very careful with. Some people don't realise if an estate has to go to probate, if there's no will being left, you need to be very careful that a solicitor, a lot of them charge you like a percentage of the value of the estate to carry out the probate. I think off the top of my head it used to be between 2 and 5%, plus VAT of course.
That's considerable.
Oh, good grief, yes. So with the low cost probate service that I've got on there, they give you a fixed fee, which is very reasonable. And the low cost will writing service I've got on there, I've got a couple of them, but again they're very decent services that are low cost, because writing a will is important. I would urge anybody listening to this to write a will. I know it's something, it's not the most sexy or exciting thing to do, and you think, oh no, I don't want to talk about my demise. But believe me, it's very important, because people who die without a will with families, you don't want them all bickering. Well, most people don't want them bickering over who has what. And also, if you've got a family member that you didn't particularly like or you had an argument with, you may not want them having any of your estate or only a small portion. So you must make that very clear by writing a will. It saves a lot of aggro, a lot of bad feeling, can create bad feeling in the family by not having a will. It just makes things very clear.
That's actually good advice, because I remember a few years back, my ex-girlfriend, she was trying to convince me write my will, and I didn't want to do it. I somehow was refusing. I didn't want to think about it.
It's a morbid thought.
Yeah. Steve, this was a fantastic conversation. Thank you very much for...
That's all right. Well, thanks for having me and going through it all. I hope it's of benefit of people to listen to this and, you know, become more educated that you can have a decent funeral, and you don't need to go by that myth or misconception that you need to spend a lot of money to give your loved one a decent send-off, because you don't. And don't be forced into it through media advertising either, you know, by like showing you the most expensive coffins.
Thanks again, and
that's right. Yeah.
Good luck with the website. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.